Hi, I'm Curtis Johnson, a screenwriter and creator at CLJ Films, a division of Dog's Den Films. With experience across various genres, from animation to feature films, my work includes Alien Domicile 2, Lot 24, distributed by ITN Films and currently streaming on all major platforms, including Sci Fi Central's YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers and 250,000 movie views. My second feature, Lot 24 The Rental, was picked up at the European film market and is now distributed by Stadium Media. Links to both films will be in the description below, and if you enjoy the content, please like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube and Instagram at CLJ Films.
Okay, so today on Conversations with CLJ Films, we'll be talking to David from Yeshua Media. Is that how you say it, David? Is it
Yeah.
Yeshua?
Yep. Yeshua Media.
Yeshua Media? Because you were for a while, you had a couple.
I was
Yeah.
I was M28 Create, I think, designs at the time, and then it was switching over to Yeshua, but it took a little bit of time for that.
And then you went in between there. You had DMJ Designs.
Well, I had DMJ Designs first, then I had M28, and then Yeshua Media.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was partnered with another person for M28, so that kind of dissolved, and
Yeah.
that's
I
what I was doing.
remember that. Dave.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is David Joseph, and he's been a very integral piece of our last two films. Alien Domicile 2, Lot 24, which was retitled from Lot 24, and our most recent film, Lot 24, The Rental. David's companies have been involved with all of our creative work, posters, our ads, our titling, a lot of that creative stuff. Even on our first film, Alien Domicile 2, Lot 24, there was a part where we had a scene where we went to like an animated effect type VFX type effect that David was responsible for. So he's been working with Dog's Den Films and me as a writer for quite a long time. So David, we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So if you want to like give your own introduction, so you have a proper introduction.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Like
I've been doing this a long time.
Who is David Joseph?
Let's see. Well, I mean, I went to college for graphic design, web design, and media arts and different things like that. So before I graduated, I actually got a job at a company called Foster Communications, and we worked with all the big hotel companies, Hilton, Holiday Inn, just all the big name companies out there, I guess you could say. We worked with all of them. We designed their logos, all the logos that you see out there, even on the Hilton and everything now are the ones that we designed. So we did all their design work, advertising. Then it went into, we started designing some things for the Titans, the Nashville Titans or whatever, Tennessee Titans. So we got into that and started working with several other companies. We worked with companies from New York and California, Arizona, just different things. Just kind of took off from there. But then, the recession happened, and so started dwindling down a little bit. Everybody started freezing their funds, and so they kind of had to let me go. So, but I ended up opening my own company and started working with big businesses again. And then I got introductions into doing movie posters from some friends, because this industry basically it's pretty much who you know, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
It's hard to
I
just
think
break
that's
in. You got to know people. But so you just, people are like, hey, I got a movie I'm working on. Would you like to do something for this? And one of the first movie posters I ever did was for Bollywood, I think. I'm so that was pretty fun. I got to work with I don't know if you've ever heard of Tiger, but he did. There's a lot of movies out there now. I think they just launched one last year as well. So I got to work on his first movie project.
Tiger is his name.
It was called, yeah, it was entitled Tiger. It's what is his name? Well, if you look up the movies Tiger, there's like series of them. Of course, the last one didn't do as well. From what I heard, I didn't get to see it,
Tiger,
but
as in like tiger, animal tiger.
yeah, like the animal tiger. Yep. So, but there's like Tiger, and then there's subtitles and things like that, or
Yeah.
so. But I think there's like four of them now. But I got to work on one of the first ones, so I did 3 movie posters for them, and they were very impressed by how fast I turned them around because they thought it was going to take me like a month to do, and I did it in a day.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I knocked out 3 movie posters in one day. I was kind of doing some side projects, because my influence was always been like Drew Struzan, who did Indiana Jones and Star Wars and all that stuff, and just I was blown away by the artwork and how he did that. And so I would, on the side, I would kind of work out some pieces and try to do some Drew Struzan type stuff, um, just to see if I could do it, challenge myself because I got into doing all the Hilton and all that stuff. There's a specific way things need to be done for that. But to me, I've always been able to draw and paint and everything. So I thought doing movie posters would be the closest thing to actually, you know, doing that type of artwork.
Well, I was gonna say that's interesting because you and I met. That's how we first met. You
Yeah.
were introduced to me through the guys over at Hidden Beach Empire,
Yep.
Keon and those guys, and they've gone on to do stuff, hundreds of millions in movies. But you would you and I think one of the first posters that because I was looking for someone to do a poster for I think our first film, and
Yep.
I don't know if it was posters because you started you did so much. You did logos, you did album covers, you did posters.
Yeah.
You were doing a bunch back then. I can't quite recall because it's probably been a good 8-9 years. But
Yeah. In a while.
I, I think one of the first posters I saw if you were involved, I wanna say had something to do with Journey to the Center of the Earth or no?
I did do a couple of those. Yeah. So probably, yeah. I
I knew
also
it,
did Pirates.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I also did Pirates of the Caribbean. So there was quite a few of those. I
So
think.
explain to the people. So here I am. I'm a kid,
Mm,
and I'm listening to this interview, or I've seen Alien Domicile 2 Lot 24, uh, or I've seen Lot 24 The Rental, and again, both of those movies are going to be in the description, if you're interested. But say I'm a kid and I look at one of those movies and I see some of our stuff, I see the
mm.
work, and I want to do that. I'm inspired by uh, the guy who did the Indiana Jones, poster. What is that process like? What goes into making a poster for a film? Like when you're working on something, and you can talk, broadly, or you can talk like more specifically. You can talk, what goes into the steps when, um, I give you a call and I say, hey, David, I've got this movie, Lot 24, The Rentals, about a guy who, you know, mentally is going crazy. Like, it's got some animation in it. What goes in your mind when you're walking through those steps?
Yeah. Well, like I mean, first, like Drew Struzan's always been such an inspiration to me. and the amount of detail he put in, things that the average person doesn't see. And I was always taught, you got to like amplify those specific details that most people wouldn't even see, and that's what makes your artwork stand out amongst everybody else, because they will see it, but they're like, something's different about this. Why am I drawn to this instead of this? Um so having that one thing that stands out, I think with me, I go, what did the old greats do? And then, for marketing, advertising, and what would I want to see if I was going to the theaters? What would stand out to me as I walked in the door? Because I've seen many posters that just were like that, and they didn't, you know, pique my interest. So a movie
What
poster,
piques your interest? What type of, like, what's one or two things that you look for in a movie poster that immediately draws you to the poster?
well, I mean, it depends on the genre, I guess. Like the old Freddy posters, where you just see the claws and ripping something. You don't necessarily see what it's ripping, but you just see that claw and you're like, huh, what is that? Especially if it's Freddy for the first time you've ever seen Freddy and didn't know anything about it. Jason with the mask, um, being in shadow, but then certain parts, being out of shadow to where you can see enough detail in the mask, but it intrigues your interest because you're like, oh, well, that's cool, you know. Whereas like Star Wars, it gave you pretty much like a story in the actual movie poster. And it made you want to see the movie because it looked very action packed. You're like, you can almost tell what the story is going to be. There was still enough hidden elements, but you can almost tell what the story is going to be by watching the poster, or just by looking at the poster. It's like you're watching the movie before you get to see the movie.
Right,
That
right.
was the one thing about Drew Struzan that drew me in, because I was like, you knew what the movie was going to be like in a sense before you ever saw it. You can kind of almost judge it. But even if it was a terrible movie, he would make that movie look like $1 million.
Right. Okay.
So I think little things like that, like when we did Lot, you were like, well, I don't want to show aliens, I don't want to show this, but we did put some aliens hidden in the background of the movie poster.
I
But
remember
you
what you
had
did.
kind
Right.
Yeah, but you had to look for them. They weren't just there. I love doing that in posters where it's not just straight up in your face. um I love it to be hidden, because if it's not necessarily supposed to be there, but it brings that intrigue, aspect to it, you're like, "Ooh, there's something there. What is that?" Like you're going to look at the poster, and then you're going to look again. And then you're going to look again, because you're like, "Well, if that's there, what else is hidden in the poster?" So you're going to be drawn more into the poster. So people are going to look at the poster longer because they're intrigued by what they're seeing.
Well, you make another good point when you were mentioning or referencing me at saying, you and I talking about kind of how we wanted it to look.
Mhm.
How is that relationship when you're designing a poster? Are you're not always working directly with the writer or the director? Sometimes you're going through an intermediary, right? How
Oh
does that
yeah,
kind
yeah, yeah. Yeah, a lot of times you talk to management, and then they're like, "Okay, the director wants you to do this. We're going to send you a synopsis. Read the synopsis and tell us what you think. We kind of have an idea, but the reason why we hired you is because of what you do. So blow us away." So there's a lot of that, and then a lot of that is kind of put on your shoulders of what it's going to be. You know, um, when I get to work with the director a lot of times know what they want, because they've got the vision for the movie. So, but even then, there's still a lot of like things that you can hide in there, or they've got a direction, but they don't know how to get there
right?
in the
Okay.
art wise. That's why they hire me. So they're like, "Hey, I've got a vision, and this is what I see. This is what I'm seeing in the camera. This is what I want it to be. I need you to give me the visuals to make that happen." you know. So a lot of times, because I've gotten to work with some wonderful directors and everything. I mean, working directly with them because of being friends with them. So that has helped out in doing movie posters. When you get to talk to management, sometimes it's a little tougher because you're going through several parties, and then you send it to them, they send it to somebody, and then they send it to somebody, and then you get to the top dog, and, and then you're like, you wait like 3 4 weeks, and you're like, I haven't heard anything back, and but it's a waiting game because you got to hear back from everybody. And then
Right.
when you get emailed, you've got like 57, like there's like, okay, one, here's this, we love this aspect. But number two, here's this, we love this, and
Right.
this is what this
Right.
person said. Number three, and so on and so forth. So you get emailed with the directions from every single person that poster went through.
Has there ever been a request for um something that you just did not kind of had a hard time getting into? Have they ever requested something that's so far out of your uh, your desire to want to do? Or do you pretty much um tailor that to the request?
I mean, I've been actually blessed to be able to work with some great people that actually let me do what I want to do. And most of the time, it ends up being the final project, the final product, like that goes into movies or goes on DVD or whatever. So there's been a lot more aspects of where I've gotten to do pretty much what I wanted to do. And a lot of times if they start going another weird way, but I'm like, I don't think marketing wise that's going to work. A lot of times they're open to what I have to say, you know.
Right.
So they're like, well, most of your visuals have done really well for movies, so I'll just take it at that, you know. Um there's not really been anything that I could say that makes me go, well, I mean, it's kind of tough to remember everything, but
Right. Right. Nothing
a
to make
lot
you
of
cringe.
times, yeah, I mean, a lot of times, different mysteries, different things that I've done, action movies or whatever, that it would be, um, I've had a couple weird requests. I can't remember exactly what they are, but then I was like, are you sure you want to do this? And they were like, yeah. I was like, okay, cool. Like I did a movie poster for the company Sticks or whatever. Is that what it's SIST? It's like, oh, what is the company? What is the anyways, I did a movie poster. It was kind of graphical. It was like the American flag, man walking, and some like 3D text in the background. And they absolutely loved it. But they were like, it's a little close to this other poster that I'd never seen before in my life. And I was like, oh, okay. So then I changed some aspects of it to make sure that it didn't match that. But when you see movie posters, so there's like 4 different kind of movie posters that you see generally,
Okay.
and almost every movie poster goes into one of those categories. There's like the God 3 or whatever. You had the big head on the poster and the two little small ones, or you can have a big head and then like several little small ones. What they call like the God 3 poster or whatever. So, but there's like normally there's like 4 categories, and they're like, okay, what's this poster going to be in? Now, sometimes you could split between 2 different ones. You're like, well, I've got some aspects here, but I think we can, throw something over here on the side.
What's your
Um,
when you're working on a poster? What's your preferred like software? You know, like can you let us
um,
and give us your setup? What's your setup? Like, what are you working on equipment wise? And then let us know what kind of software you prefer to work with.
okay. So, well, I mean, I heard a little bit about the second side, but what was the first side?
I was saying that let us know a little bit about your setup. Like, what kind of setup are you working with? What type of computer, and what do you what
Oh
do
yeah,
you, what
yeah.
do you have in terms of RAM, and then also what software are you using when you're building your posters and indoor? I want to get off of posters. This will be the last question we talk about posters, and I want to
Mm,
go into titling a little bit. But
okay.
yeah. So what are you working with equipment wise, and then what software do you recommend for posters or titling or whatever we may be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Mac guy. I can work with PC or Mac. I mean, because different places I go, you have to use PC. Other places you go, you have to use Mac. But I prefer the interface of Mac because that's what I went to school with, and that's just what I've come to love. If I use a PC, I prefer using, um, I prefer not to use Windows as much as possible. Um, but if I have to, I know how to use the interface there too. But I mean, I try to run. You generally need at least like a 128, you know, gigs of RAM because like
Okay.
each program runs 2 to 4 gigs at one time. Depending on what you're running. Um, but you have to have enough space, two terabytes at least of you know hard drive space and 128 at least in your for RAM.
Okay.
Um, you know, Make sure you're on the latest system requirements. Because like a lot of the programs, some of them still run on Intel, but I mean, there's so like a lot of the programs are switching over to M2, being redesigned for M2 because Mac's no longer using Intel
Okay.
because they have their own system. So M2's, you know, got more cores and everything. But it's funny because like when you render with like 3D programs, um, whether you
Mhm.
render with, you know, uh CPU or GPU, um, sometimes single core is even faster. So when you have tons of cores, it doesn't always make your, rendering times faster.
Right. Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Mhm.
So what are we rendering in? What are we using? You know.
I mean, I love Blender ever since they put Blender on the market. Blender's been a wonderful thing for me. I've used After Effects, Elements, which Element 3D, which is great. I think it's pretty cool because you could do everything in After Effects. But
Okay.
when it's like After Effects, a plugin in After Effects, I think when you can like separate your 3D program from your After Effects, yes, it might make you think a little bit harder on how you're going to do something, rather than just. But when you're running After Effects and Element 3D, sometimes you get some glitchy stuff happening, and it's not always as smooth. I use Blender because it's a separate 3D program, and it's gotten a whole lot better than it used to. There's a lot of things you couldn't do, but I've been with Blender since Blender came out. But I can also use Cinema 4D.
Okay.
So there's certain things that I might have to use Cinema 4D for. I've worked with Maya and everything. To me, see, and a lot of companies still use it. To me, it still has like granddaddy framework,
Okay.
but it's gotten a lot better than it used to. I mean, I remember when Maya used to do some pretty cheesy things, but now it's gotten so much better. And but I like Blender because it was made specifically for that specific thing, and people are making shows now out of Blender. There's TV shows now being made out of Blender. The Lego movie, I think the second one, if I'm not, maybe it was either the first or second. That was made in Blender,
Really, the whole movie made in Blender?
from what I saw. So I mean, there's aspects, and I'm sure they took the engine because it's an open source. That they took the engine and did their own thing with it.
Right.
But
Right.
just goes to show you what Blender can do.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, it's an amazing program for me. And then you always have to use Photoshop and Illustrator, Um, generally the billing, most I've never really gotten a Photoshop billing. Most of the time the billing's done in Illustrator. So
Okay.
when they send the billing over, it's always an Illustrator file or an SVG file or whatever. But and a lot of times that's not a part that I actually have to do. A lot of times that's done for me.
Okay. Okay. So is there an
So
industry standard um
for
that
billing,
for uh for making posters? If you're making posters or work, is there a standard program? Like for instance, people say when you're writing a script that the final draft is the industry standard, and I've used Final Draft, but I also use Studio Binder, which I like a
yeah,
lot. Is there industry standard in terms of designing, on the creative side, or is
yeah,
it
I
just
would say you're not really getting people doing Corel Draw or anything or ink or anything in doing in movie posters.
okay?
If it's a vector movie poster, it's going to be done in vector. There might be some aspects that are brought into Photoshop. Majority of the posters are done in Photoshop. Uh, you know, Most of the time you get the template. You get them like in half sizes or thirds or whatever, and then when you stretch it out, most of the time you're at either 150 or 300 DPI. Um, you know, but you do that like in half size, so that way you can do more things with it. But computers are able to handle a whole lot more than they used to be able to. So you can actually do a full, movie poster 24, uh, or yeah, by like 40 or whatever. So
Oh, okay.
you could do a standard movie poster size, in most of the stuff now. But a lot of people still like the half sizes just because when you're retouching faces or you're doing whatever you have to do with the movie poster, um, it's just easier and doesn't, if you have other things going on in the background, like you're running too much CPU or something, because these posters end up being like 3 and 4 gigs.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
They get pretty big.
Right.
So if you're doing it at half the size, and you have to talk to your printer because it's not always the same. It depends on who's going to print it and things like that. They're like, oh, we prefer it to be this, in the final. So it's like, okay. And then your bleeds, I normally do an inch rather than a half inch, just gives more safety margin. So that way when people cut, because a lot of times, even with machines, you get crooked cuts. So um, just to make sure there's more bleed there. Um, but yeah, I would say most of the time, if somebody's already working on something and then they shoot it back over to me, it's always a Photoshop file.
Okay. Photoshop. Okay. Right on. So I don't
Yeah.
want to. I know I've only got you for about 10 more minutes. So I did want to ask you a couple questions about titling. So
Hmm.
I know you did the titling on both Alien Domicile 2 Lot 24 and on Lot 24 The Rental. Links to both films will be in the description. And I know I don't know if you've done titling on other films. I'm pretty sure you have, but
Oh yeah.
if you hadn't, just tell me what do you like, when it comes to titling, what goes into, because most people think of titling as just running the credits. And they're like, I'm just gonna pick a template that just scrolls up, you know, I'm just gonna put the content in and keep it with a black background with white words. And they think that's all that needs to happen. And I'm not saying that's not all that needs to happen, but I do know that if you get you someone who's good at it, like yourself, you can. I mean, just the first part of our first film, just that whole sequence, it was brought to life because of how good the titling was. You know, um,
Yeah.
from everything from the animation to what you put in the background. So you're not, like you say, you're not just when you look at a poster, you're seeing the movie without seeing the movie. Well, in titling, kind of the same thing. You're setting the tone for what they're going to see after the words go away. So what goes into that process?
Yeah. I mean, every genre has its own titling style. Um, So you have to think about, once again, like what the movie is going to be about to get into what the title is going to be. And, like if it's a horror film, it's got to be creepy.
Right.
Um, it's like if it's an adventure film, more than likely the title's going to fly in and do something, and then it's going to fly or break apart and, fly out or something. Depending on if it's action packed, like there's a lot of times the titling flies in and then part of, the background or something shows part of an action scene of the video or something. And then it's like, it's freeze frames and then slows down and then, flies out or something. All that stuff depends on what the genre is going to be. A lot of times in horror films, it's like you'll see slash fingers or something through the titling, or it'll shake and then like melt or something and fall apart. And then sometimes there's just the typical fade in, fade out. But the fade in, fade out is, to me, it's not creative and it's kind of generic. And it's like any program can do that now. So you have to
Okay.
put something more into it than just fade in, fade out, you know?
Okay.
Like, and don't get me wrong, it's still used. It is still the number one thing used in a lot of movies. If you notice, there's a lot of times you just see the title fade in and it
Right.
fades out, you
Right.
know?
Right. Right.
But that's when you have like motion in the background. You have part of the video already playing or something. I mean, there is points where you see it like where it's just a black background and you fade the title in and fade it out. But for
Right.
me, that was always way too boring.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
I always had to throw something in there that just kind of makes it stand out. It's like, it's like when people use Microsoft Word instead of using Photoshop for their flyers or their posters, there's a big difference. Yeah, you
Okay.
can do so much more.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so, and with Lot, I kind of wanted, because 3D was really popular. You had Transformers and different things coming out. And so I did some of that tying. And so I was like, well, maybe we could bring some of this 3D stuff, because originally we did it like all flats. And I was like, well, this works too, and I was like, well, what happens if we 3D this and see what happens? And so I started bringing some more 3D aspects into it. And to me, it stood out a little better.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I would agree. It did. It stood out a lot, and I think it made it definitely set the tone, um, in our mind and in our viewers' minds. So I think it was definitely a great call. A great call. You know. Um, hey, before I get you out of here, I know that you. I didn't mention earlier that I know you are. I know. So are you? Tell me, are you a one man team? Are you? How do you? Is there a?
um, it depends. I've worked with. I have people on standby if I need to use them, but I've worked with so many people that they just wanted to work with me. That when I sent the work off to somebody else, um, they just weren't getting the same results, and so everybody wanted to work with me specifically. So
Yeah.
I tell my wife I'm kind of like that. I'm kind of like Hitch. Hitch has that little black card,
Oh
and it's
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
to get the Hitch, you have to have one of those black cards. You have to know this person. Not
Right.
trying to toot my own horn. It's easier because because of the projects I've worked on, I've had so many people come up to me and want me to do it for like $50, or $20. And I'm like, how much time goes into this stuff? And they're
Right.
like, no, but you know, because you did it for these people, movie companies or what, they're like, I figured you do it for like $25. And like, I can't have everybody coming up to me asking me to do it for $25.
Right.
I'd never make any money and I'd be
Right.
spending so many hours and never get any sleep.
Right. 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 Hey,
So,
that's the other thing. A lot goes into what you do. I know a lot goes into it, and I know there's a huge commitment. Um, like probably just from a rendering standpoint, right? Like, doesn't it lock after you've worked on something? Is your computer locked up for days at a time rendering out? You know.
not anymore. When we did Lot, yes, it took, sometimes the rendering would take 24 hours. So I could still do some stuff with my computer, but when we were rendering the test footage of the 3D stuff, that definitely took 24 hours sometimes to render out the sequences. The title sequences, I think, rendered in maybe 2 to 3 hours. But when we were working like with those sample alien things and everything, yeah, that was like a 24-hour render. So
Yeah.
they have render farms too that you can join with, and they would help you render your stuff out. Um, you know, depending on your computer. But rendering 3D definitely puts your computer to a task. It puts it to a test for sure. It's like, how good is your CPU? How far are you going to get that today?
Right.
So things like that. Yeah, I think when we were working with Lot, yeah, there was definitely some times where you're like, can you get that to me? And I'm like, well, I might have it in like 24 hours because it's going to take like 24 hours to re-render this.
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
um, so I'd let it like render through the night and render through like half the day, the next day. So, and then be able to put the pieces together.
Right.
Because at that time I was still using Blender, but I was also using Cinema 4D. And then after